Well, yesterday there was a ton of information that was released, specifically by Nintendo, but I noticed Sony also had some stuff that they put out there. Probably going to cover some of that on the second channel here, so make sure you check that as well. But it appears that Nintendo kind of flipped their 2022 a bit here with a couple of titles, and now they're starting to really fill out the second half of this year. And based on what we know now, it looks like there's still some other things that they're going to be revealing. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first of all, the big news yesterday, Splatoon 3 is now dated. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 also got dated earlier in the week, and it appears that Nintendo just kind of flipped around the release dates. Now, with Splatoon 3, we had an entire trailer that was shown off yesterday that was like 80% gameplay, which is great. In fact, it almost looks like they just sat down at Nintendo, the development team, and played a match and just kind of jumped around between camera angles, and that's pretty much what they showed was the game itself. Shocking idea now, right? But I liked what I saw there. I will admit, I understand some people saying that it looks like Splatoon. I mean, that's kind of what I was expecting there, at least with the multiplayer side. There have been some advancements that they've made and some new features introduced here and just improvements all the way around. I'm still thinking like the big hook about this game that's going to make it different significantly than Splatoon 2 is going to come down to that single player. And I think that's still being held off maybe to show a little closer to release because the game is coming out September 9th. Remember, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was originally going to be releasing in September, and Nintendo just moved it up into July, right at the end of July, though, like the 29th. So it seems that Monolith Soft had Xenoblade basically ready to go, and Splatoon 3 just needed a bit more time, so Nintendo flipped them around. Now, Splatoon 3 was set up with a release window of summer, and I know people look at September, especially like September 9th, and they're like, that seems like the fall. I guess technically fall starts like the third week of September. It's like the 21st or 22nd, something like that. So sure, Splatoon 3 on a technicality, if you want to be really literal about it, did still find its way into summer, although I think a lot of us were picturing maybe July or August for that Splatoon 3 release to come out before Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Things are changing pretty quickly here, though, for Nintendo. And if you really start to look at the second half of this year for them, I mean, if we just sit down and look at the releases that we know are coming up with release dates, Switch Sports, that's out this week coming up, April 29th. We have Mario Strikers that I'm really looking forward to. That's out June 10th. So that's the game that, we usually get a game that comes out like right around E3 time. I think we've had like Mario Tennis, for example. That's one I remember one year. That seems to be the E3 game, although there's no E3 this year, so it's just the June game. And then 2 weeks after that releases, Fire Emblem Warriors, that will be coming out. And then into July, we, of course, have Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and then Splatoon 3. And from there are still many titles that we don't necessarily have release dates for, but are still slated for this year. Think of, obviously, we have Bayonetta 3, which should be a pretty big release when it does come out. I'm still thinking October, but who knows now because these release dates within Nintendo are very fluid. I know people are saying Splatoon 3 was delayed. They never gave a release date technically, but internally, yes, it's pretty clear some things had to move around because they publicly took Xenoblade 3 and moved it up a couple of months. Obviously, something had to be shifted around with the Nintendo, and I mentioned this had everything to do with Splatoon 3, and that appears to be the case. But then going away from just Bayonetta 3, Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope, that's rumored to still be hitting this year, and that seems like something that could find its way into the fall or holiday time period. And remember, we still have Advance Wars. That does eventually have to come out, and I still think Nintendo's going to push it out this year. I know they're trying to be sensitive and careful around what's happening in the world currently, but eventually they're at the point where they're like, look, this game has to come out. Maybe that's something that does find its way into like the fall or holiday season. Even if it ends up into December, I just think Nintendo wants to get that game out, and it just continues to add on to releases for the second half of this year. Oh, and we can't forget Nintendo's biggest release of 2022, and that's a brand new Pokemon generation starting up with Scarlet and Violet. Not only that, it's going to be a completely new direction for the series, with this being an open world style game. And we still need a ton of information as to how all of that is going to work. But based on where the Switch most likely will be, over 110 or 115 million users for its install base, and a big-time Pokemon game releasing like that, it's going to cause quite a bit of interest over the holidays. And then we also have to realize the slate of games we're looking at currently with release dates and some without them, that's not everything that's coming out this year. Nintendo, typically, when they show up at E3, which it's just going to be a June Direct at this point, who knows? Maybe they're part of Summer Games Fest, and if they're not, I'm sure Jeff Keighley will say it is part of Summer Games Fest anyway. They're probably going to announce games that are like 2, 3, 4 months away, because that's seemingly what Nintendo has been doing more and more this generation. I know we get those outliers, like Breath of the Wild 2, or Metroid Prime 4, or, Bayonetta 3, but we've seen games get announced and then, they're out in 3 or 4 months, right? So I could see them showing up and doing things like, hey, we are going to have a Zelda game this year, and it's going to be Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, a combined package, remasters, and we'll drop them into, that could be one that they just drop into August since nothing is slated now. They're games they've released many times now, so it seems like you put them into a nice little bundle, drop them into August, and that'll work to fill that time slot. And I know people are like, we've had these games released so many times. If you think about it, Wind Waker is on the GameCube, sure was compatible with the Wii, but there are a lot of people now who are picking up a Switch, and that's like their first system. So they probably have no idea what Wind Waker even is, and they'll see it pop up and be like, oh, wow, this is a really good game. So, yeah, it's going to sell well. That and Twilight Princess combined at, $60. But the other one is that Metroid Prime remaster. We haven't really had any obvious indication that this is, real, but it seems like we've been hearing about it so much, then the story's changed around, and I think it at least makes sense to do Metroid Prime just to get people used to the Prime series ahead of Prime 4. And a lot of that has to do with Metroid Prime in general. I'm hoping sells really well when the fourth one comes out, but it does need at least some introduction. And I think doing a remaster/remake from Retro Studios to tide people over until Prime 4 comes out, since that needed to restart development, makes a lot of sense, and once again would work to fill in that second half of 2022. That's one that, that could come out in August, and then maybe the Legend of Zelda Remastered Collection ends up later on in the year. But I do think Nintendo will have at least 2 different remaster remakes, whichever way these end up looking when they come out. And then you bring in the idea of the Nintendo Switch Online, seeing updates when it comes to DLC, which, Splatoon 2 is having that Octo expansion downloadable content just kind of dropped in there. Obviously getting people ready for Splatoon 3, going back to Splatoon 2 if you missed out on that downloadable content, adding more value to that Switch Online service, and I wouldn't be shocked if we saw a new system introduced here. And Game Boy seems to be the leading platform that people believe would be added here. Not necessarily Game Boy Advance, but it wouldn't shock me if Nintendo dropped Game Boy into the base Nintendo Switch Online service, and then you have Game Boy Advance added into the expansion pack. But it's Nintendo. Maybe they just take regular Game Boy, not even Game Boy Color, like the monochrome Game Boy, and they're like, nope, this is part of the expansion pack $50 a year tier. Although, let's face it, if they drop Pokemon Blue, Pokemon Red, Pokemon Yellow in there, people are going to jump in and sign up for that, even if it's just in monochrome, basic Game Boy. But I think right now, looking at 2022 as it stands, Nintendo is building up a pretty good year for themselves from a first-party publisher standpoint. Some of the games that they have slated just to show off release dates, and ones that we're hearing about through rumors, won't even be the entire slate of titles. I'm sure there's going to be some surprises thrown in there, and it's going to be a very interesting summer direct whenever they do show it. It was easier to at least try to look at, okay, E3, it's going to be on Tuesday, we'll be ready to go, but now, technically, they can drop that direct at any time. And then, of course, they could also have an indie direct, and I think it's going to be a pretty jam-packed second half of the year for the Switch. But let me know what you guys think about all of this down below, with the second half looking pretty packed for Nintendo and them kind of flipping around release dates and stuff, just getting everything lined up. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.